today we're going to read a story called Little Leaders, Bold Women in Black History. And this is a little bit of a different story because every page talks about a different Black woman that has shaped history. And I'm just going to share with you a few of them from this book that really inspired me, hoping that they'll inspire you too. But there are so many. Do you see how many pages are in this story? There are so many inspirational Black women that if I read this all, we might have to sit here for a whole day. So I'm just going to read you 5 of the ones that really stood out to me, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. As to all the women whose stories are in this book, thank you for being leaders. Thank you for being brave. Thank you for being bold. We are grateful and we are inspired. To all the leaders yet to come, big or little, I cannot wait to hear your stories. So all of the people that we're going to read about today are real people that have made a really big difference in the world. So in the introduction, it tells us a little bit about what we're going to be reading. In a society where being Black and female meant being an outsider or sometimes invisible, these women dared to go after what they wanted, to demand what they deserved. Some of them were reluctant leaders, while others were not even conscious of their bravery. But their legacies live on to pave the way for more of us to follow. Many of them didn't set out to be pioneers, but all of them were, and we can look to each one of them for inspiration. So the first leader that I wanted to share with you is Rebecca Lee Crumpler. And she was a politician. So I'm going to or a physician. I'm sorry. So I'm going to read to you a little bit about her history and why is she so special. So a physician is like a doctor. From the very beginning, caring for others was a part of Rebecca's life. She was raised in Pennsylvania by her aunt, who provided healthcare services to the people in her neighborhood. This passion for helping her community became her life's mission. She attended a private school in Massachusetts and went on to work as a nurse for 8 years. In 1860, so that was the year, she applied to an all-white medical school, the New England Female Medical College. A bold and risky move, but she was accepted. Rebecca graduated in 1864, becoming the first Black woman physician in the country. Out of more than 50,000 physicians in the United States at the time, only about 300 were women, and Rebecca was the only Black woman. She began her practice in Boston, specializing in the care of women and children. But when the Civil War came to an end, she moved to Richmond, Virginia, to work with the Freedmen's Bureau. The fallen Confederate South was extremely hostile to the newly freed slaves, so Rebecca worked with the Bureau to provide health care to them. Rebecca had been born free in Delaware, the state with the highest number of free Blacks before the war. She was new to the adversity and racism of the South, but she endured it for the sake of helping the poor and needy. Throughout her career, Rebecca had a particular passion for helping women and children. In 1883, she published a 2-part text titled A Book of Medical Discourses. The first part focuses on care for infants, and the second part on women's health. It is possibly the first medical article published by a Black woman. And that's Rebecca Lee Crumpler. The next woman I wanted to share with you is a teacher and a painter, and her name is Alma Woodsy Thomas. And at the bottom it says, "Color is life." Born in Columbus, Georgia, Alma grew up in a home surrounded by lush landscapes and beautiful plants. In her youth, Alma showed promise in architecture, but was truly in love with art. She said that when she walked into her first art classroom in high school, It felt like entering heaven. She enjoyed working with children and pursued a career in teaching kindergarten. She taught arts and crafts for several years before attending Howard University. She was the first student in Howard's brand new art department, whose founder encouraged her to paint full-time. Upon graduation, though, she returned to her first love, education. She devoted her life to children, teaching at Shaw Junior High School for 35 years. She continued painting and pursued her master's degree in art education at Columbia University in New York City during her summers off. She is most often associated with the group of artists belonging to the color field movement, painters who worked only with larger shapes or fields of color to express themselves. When she retired from teaching in 1960, Alma concentrated on painting full-time. She had a big art show at Howard University, for which she created something totally different from anything she'd done before. Inspired by nature, she created paintings with tiny bright rectangles and repeating shapes. It became her signature style. In 1972, when she was 80 years old, Alma's paintings were exhibited at the Whitney Museum of American Art. This was the first ever solo exhibition of an African American woman artist at one of America's most important art museums. Alma is truly a testament to being dedicated to the things you love and having patience to let it grow. So again, this was Alma Woodsy Thomas. The next woman I would like to share with you is a pilot. So she flew airplanes. And her name is Bessie Coleman. Bessie grew up in a small, segregated town in Texas. At home with 3 younger siblings around, she had a lot of responsibilities. Washing clothes by hand, fetching clean water, on top of walking 4 miles to school and back every day. Bessie knew that one day she would leave her small town. In 1915, she moved to Chicago to live with her older brothers. Returning from World War I, they told her all about being in France and about how the women there could fly planes, unlike the women in America. This got Bessie curious, furiously curious. She applied to every aviation school in America she could find, but was denied entry. No one at any of these schools thought a girl could fly, especially not a black girl. Bessie wanted to prove them wrong. In 1920, she moved to France, where she could finally learn aviation. She was so gifted, she graduated from the 10-month flight school in only 7 months. So in 1921, Bessie became the first African-American woman in the world to receive her pilot's license. She specialized in stunt flying, parachuting, and aerial tricks. After returning home to the United States, Bessie flew for huge crowds. She was very popular among both white and black Americans and stood up against segregation and discrimination whenever she could. She hoped to open up her own flight school to teach other girls of color how to fly. Unfortunately, during a test flight in 1926, a mechanical issue caused her plane to crash. Bessie passed away, but her legacy lives on. In 1977, the Bessie Coleman Aviators Club opened in Chicago to support women of all races to reach their dreams of flying. So her name was Bessie Coleman. This next woman you might have heard about and you might have read about in your classroom. And she was an activist and a writer, and her name was Rosa Parks. Growing up in Montgomery, Alabama, Rosa detested the rules of segregation. having to drink from different water fountains, or being barred from white-only restaurants. And in the South, rules for riding the bus were particularly harsh. A black person had to enter through the front door, pay the fare, exit the bus, and then re-enter through the rear door. Each bus had 3 sections: a whites-only section in the front, a black section in the back, and an overflow section in the middle. If the middle was empty, a black person could sit there. But if one white person wanted to sit in the middle, every black person would have to get up and stand at the back of the bus. In December 1955, after a long shift at work, Rosa waited for the bus with empty seats and finally got one with a seat in the overflow section. But before long, the white section became full, and Rosa and others were asked to move. Enough was enough for Rosa. She refused to relinquish her seat or to give up her seat. The bus driver filed charges. Rosa was arrested and jailed. She used her one phone call to contact her friend at the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, NAACP. Rosa was not the first person to fight these laws, and it wasn't even her first time. She had been arrested previously for defying bus rules, but her protest ignited a reaction that caught the attention of the whole country. Martin Luther King Jr. called for a boycott of all transportation in Montgomery. The Montgomery bus boycott was a key element of the civil rights movement and set off a chain reaction of protests across the United States. The boycott was ultimately successful. In 1956, the bus system was integrated, but there was still a long way to go for the fight for civil rights. So Rosa continued to work with the NAACP and the Black Power movement throughout her life. And her name was Rosa Parks. So there's one more person that I wanted to share with you, but again, there are so many important and powerful and strong Black women in this story. But the last one that I wanted to share with you is a tennis champion. And her name is Althea Gibson. A self-described street rebel, Althea was a child with a lot of energy. Growing up on the streets of Harlem, she preferred to shoot pool or go boxing and bowling or play basketball or stickball rather than doing her schoolwork. She struggled with rules, but everything changed when she found tennis at 14. Members of the Harlem Cosmopolitan Club noticed her talent and took her under their wings, teaching her the game and a respect for the rules. Once she committed, she was a force to be reckoned with. By age 15, she won her first American Tennis Association National Junior Championship. Most sports were segregated at the time, so when Althea became the first Black athlete to enter a U.S. national competition, it was a landmark event. Althea became the first Black tennis player to compete in the U.S. National Championship in 1950, and then was the first African American to win a Grand Slam. Her wins paved the way for Black tennis players to come, including Venus and Serena Williams. Despite the barrier she broke in the public eye, segregation still kept her from entering through the front doors, eating with other players, and using the locker rooms. In 1958, she retired from tennis. In those days, it was difficult to make a living playing sports. Even though she was regarded as one of the best athletes in the world, Althea had to return to the real world and find work. But she wasn't done being a rebel later in life. She picked up golf and became the first Black woman to compete on a professional tour. So this was Althea Gibson. I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did, friends, and I hope that you were inspired by these wonderful leaders in Black history.